A fourth question. How does one know if he or she is called to ease the suffering of others? The calling to respond to the suffering of others is not necessarily one that requires discernment. Let me explain. The calling to respond to the suffering of others is a calling that all Christians have, and indeed all people have, by virtue of being human. It is intrinsic to our humanity that we respond to the suffering of others. The Bible describes mankind as being made in the image of God. Therefore, we ought to value what God values. We ought to care for what God cares for. And God cares for mankind. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, so that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3, verse 16. The Christian is one who expresses a compassionate concern for the well-being of others. Furthermore, the Christian has a God-given capacity to respond to the suffering of his neighbour. That capacity is the love of God. We cannot respond effectively and perseveringly to others in need if we ourselves are unloved. We cannot give what we do not have. We must know the reality of true love if we are to respond in true love to those who are suffering. The degree to which we love others is proportional to the degree to which we are loved. The Christian has experienced consummate love. The Apostle John wrote this: "We love because he, that is God, first loved us." He also wrote, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world, that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us." The Christian, one who has experienced this quality of divine love, is able to reach out to others in their suffering, even while they themselves are suffering. Now, how does a Christian determine the sphere in which they are to show compassion to those who are suffering? The issue is not so much what the Christian ought to do, but what the Christian ought to be. The Christian is one who loves God, one who knows the love of God and who expresses the love of God. Jesus put it like this: "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbour as yourself." The Christian is to be concerned with knowing God. And as the Christian grows in the love of God, this will bring the Christian healing from their own internal suffering and sin, so that they can respond to the suffering of their neighbour. This response becomes a characteristic of the Christian's life. They are always to be responding to those around them who are suffering. That is, to those who are seeking help and in genuine need of help. The sphere of this response will grow according to the capacity of the Christian and the opportunities and provision that God makes for their compassionate response to others. God does not generally call people to works of great magnitude. He calls his people to fidelity in small things, and then as they mature, he may call them to bigger things. It is not so much the magnitude of the work, or the distance travelled, or the difficulty encountered that pleases God, but rather the motivation and the end to which we love our neighbour. Do we love out of a selfish love for personal gratification, or do we love out of a selfless love of God, to make the love of God known in its compassion towards the one who is suffering? The Christian's capacity and horizon may be stretched by God as they give themselves in small ways. As the Christian so gives themselves, then God may enlarge their appetite and their capacity for greater service. In this way, the Christian is delivered from being driven by guilt to being driven by a genuine love, the love of God and the love of neighbour. A fifth question. According to your faith perspective, how does one balance self-care with other care when I serve those who are suffering? Well, we can only love to the extent that we are loved. Therefore, the Christians should take care of themselves. First, by giving themselves to growing in the knowledge and love of God. As Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. In Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he directed his disciples to find liberation from anxiety. And he said this, seek first his kingdom, that's God's kingdom, and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Matthew 6. The Christian is called to focus upon God. The Christian is called to the worship of God. That is, to know God and to grow in the love of God and the fulfillment of God's will concerning the love of others. The worship of God provides the emotional stability and strength and direction for the work a Christian does for God. When a Christian so lives with the worship of God as their first priority, everything else will fall into place. They will know God's love and tangibly express God's love in appropriate ways. They will maintain a right perspective and balance in the work that they do for God. The worship of God drives the work that is done for God. Thank you.